The US president has vowed to keep the peace as he touches down in Belfast ahead of a day of diplomatic talks.
Well, he was greeted last night on the steps of Air Force One by the PM, who he will hold a meeting with later today.
And the president will also visit the University of Ulster to deliver a short speech before then heading to the Republic of Ireland. Well, let's speak to the Shannon Secretary of State for Business and Industrial Strategy, Jonathan Reynolds. Good morning to you, Mr Reynolds. Look, first of all, a few thoughts from you, if you will, on events in Northern Ireland, perhaps a slightly pared-back visit from the President and perhaps heeding the advice of your former leader, Tony Blair, in all of this.
Well, good morning. Yes, lovely to join you from Staley Bridge today rather than College Green for a change. But look, I welcome the President's visit to Northern Ireland. I think the progress made in Northern Ireland that belongs in the main to the people of Northern Ireland themselves, and the tremendous things we've seen since the Good Friday Agreement was reached 25 years ago. It is something to cherish. And I think we all want to see power sharing back on track. That can only come from the political actors, the political parties in Northern Ireland themselves. But the President's visit can galvanise that, can bring people together, can show actually the whole of the world, I think, has an interest in seeing the success, the prosperity of Northern Ireland continue. That has got to be welcomed. So it's good to have the President here. The Americans have always been an ally, a supporter in the peace process. Let's hope it perhaps just brings the parties a little bit closer together, and we can all look forward to power sharing being back on track.
Why on earth can he only spend a few hours there?
Well, look, I imagine the President has a pretty demanding schedule. I think we should welcome his visit. I think sometimes, to be honest, we're a little bit needy when it comes to presidents. We want to read too much into, is the relationship still special? Of course it's special. But look, we should be a self-confident nation.
I'm not interested in whether the relationship is special or not. I'm interested in his interest in Irish affairs and Northern Ireland particularly.
Well, look, I think him coming is a positive thing. Of course, I think everyone would like to see him spend as much time here as is possible. He'll have competing demands on his time, but I think his visit is a positive thing and we should welcome it.
Bill Clinton had competing demands for his time, and the man was integral to everything that went on. He's there again today with his wife Hillary.
Well, I think you're right. I think Bill Clinton played a significant role. Obviously, many people did, but I think his engagement was always in good faith and serious and substantial to it. But look, let's not compare different presidents from different times. We should welcome the support of our American
It's an anniversary. It's very important to compare them.
But
look, listen, obviously he's got nothing to say on the Northern Irish situation, and truthfully, neither do you. But you do have something to say about the high streets, and I'm being serious about this. It is an important initiative. Your leaders in Great Yarmouth and Norfolk today. It's a terrible situation. You'll know what it's like in Staley Bridge, replicated everywhere around the country. How on earth, and I know you're going to blame the Tories, but it could be progression, it could be modern life, it could be new technology, our new shopping habits, all of which contribute to the decline of the high street. How are you going to put it right?
Yeah, that's right, Eamon. I mean, there are lots of things, and people's shopping habits have changed, online shopping, supermarkets, I get all that. But I do believe supermarkets or high streets have a major role to play. And actually what we want to put forward today is real practical measures that would make a difference. So at the top of that is a change to the business rates system. So we'd raise the threshold for small business rates relief to £25,000 from £15,000. We'd pay for that by increasing what's called the digital services tax, which the bigger online companies pay, to cross-subsidise that. We want to tackle the issue of late payments. So we've talked before about what a significant issue this is. We'd make bigger companies report on how quickly they pay their suppliers, smaller companies, to make sure those inequities are ironed out of the system. We'd use some of the money from the windfall tax the government's got and what we originally put forward to help businesses with that transition to lower carbon forms of energy. So you're not just helping people with their energy bills now, but for the long term too. And we give councils much stronger powers to intervene where you've got boarded up vacant shops that have been vacant for years. The owners aren't interested. Bring them back into use. And of course, as well as tackling crime and antisocial behaviour is a big issue for town centres and high streets themselves. It's a major issue whether people want to open a business in a high street. So This is all part of the answer. And I think these are real practical measures. They respond to those changing habits that you've talked about, but they just also, I think, are a fairer balance of where businesses are taxed, where relief should be applied, and also tackling long-term issues like late payment and boarded up shops and people who aren't interested in using their own premises. And I think they'd make a big difference. And I really hope we'll see the government respond to them. And it's great that Keir is in. Great Yarmouth today. You're right to say Staley Bridge is another good example of this. I think most people would look around the country and say high streets need a bit of support, they need a better environment to operate in, and these are practical measures to do that.
What about what's happening in Washington? The IMF putting some pretty alarming figures out there. The UK set to be the worst performing major economy in the G7 this year, according to them. And world leaders have joined them, amongst them Jeremy Hunt, our Chancellor, the Governor of the Bank of England, trying to allay any possible new banking threat. I mean, how concerned should we be about that and a possible global recession?
Yeah, well, those are two incredibly significant issues. So firstly, on that IMF forecast for the UK, I find this incredibly frustrating because there is no doubt the UK is the most poorly performing major economy. And I don't think it has to be that way. I think we've got major things in green hydrogen, offshore wind, financial services, things we could absolutely lead the world on. But we've got to acknowledge at the minute we are missing out. We've seen, particularly in America and now in the European Union, really big, bold initiatives to attract investment to them. We haven't got the same thing, and that's what we want to do. I think there are practical ways to do that. On your very serious question on the banking crisis, look, I think people will be exasperated because they've lived through one banking crisis not too long ago. I don't think we're in the same territory. The situation isn't the same now. What we have seen is a succession of particularly smaller banks be too exposed to rising interest rates, which really is quite worrying. Now, I think there are ways the system is much more robust than it was back in 2008, but we shouldn't be, casual about what we've seen, particularly with Silicon Valley Bank. I think there's right to be a focus on that concerted action around the world, but it is different to what we saw in the past, and I do believe the issues are resolvable.
Yeah, and look, the Chancellor said that one of his issues is to halve inflation by the end of the year, and obviously the Bank of England have their target of 2%. I mean, do you think that's going to happen?
I think inflation has probably peaked. I mean, I do smile when the Chancellor says this, because when inflation hit that record level, that double-digit level, it was all international factors. And the war in Ukraine was a significant factor in there. Now that some of those supply chains have adjusted to that, we are seeing, I think, inflation start to come down in the main. Obviously, now the Chancellor wants personal responsibility for that. So I'm a little bit sceptical about the government's role within there. But I do think inflation will come down. It's important to say, of course, when we talk about it coming down, that's still inflation going up. I mean, that's how inflation works. So the record food prices in particular that people have seen, they're not going to reverse. They're going to go up by a lesser amount. But it still will be an incredibly difficult cost of living crisis for people. And the heart of this, the real solution to this, the British economy's got to work better than it has for the last 13 years at a growth rate of 1.5%, very poor by historical standards for the UK. We've got to see better than that. And that's what the Chancellor is responsible for. His decisions will make a major impact on that. And I'd like to see him focus a bit more on that and maybe look and see what the Americans are doing, what the Europeans are doing, emulate some of that success.
And in the meantime, our high streets, which what we were talking about there, have got to make a living. People have got to pay for their premises. And I just want to know what your leader and what you as a party are promising, and on what timescale, how quickly can you promise to deal with the parking issues, to deal with the lack of independent shops being squeezed out by the big chains, by the Specsavers and the Pizza Expresses and these guys come along, Boots, they come along, they get a high street unit. There's nothing left for the independent people there as well. Greedy landlords. If I hear another opticians that come to me and say, well, we simply can't afford to practice here, Eamon, because the landlords are just tripling the rent or whatever. So the battle for whatever's left of the high street, how quickly can you turn that around?
Well, a lot of these changes can be done very quickly. So take that change to business rates, which would specifically assist those smaller independent retailers, because they tend to be in the smaller premises. If you look around a high street like mine, you will see in the main the smaller units are the ones that are occupied because they've got this exemption from business rates if they qualify for it. So that could be done relatively quickly. Tackling late payments to businesses could be done. You require, I think, legislation in Parliament, but as quickly as that could be done, you'd have that change in place. Getting support in terms of the energy bills and energy transitions could be done relatively quickly. And most of all, on things like crime and antisocial behaviour, you clearly need the neighbourhood officers to do that. I mean, our plan is to centralise some of the procurement in police forces, use that saving to put over extra 10,000 more additional neighbourhood officers on the street. Crime and things takes time, but some of those changes to the tax system, to the incentives, they could be done by government very quickly if the political will was there to do that. And all it's about is making sure there's a more competitive environment, just tilting the balance a little bit in favour of the kind of people you're talking about, so we can have the kind of vibrant high streets, which I think everybody wants, but at the minute, it's fair to say we're not getting.
Jonathan, you've got a magnificent energy for it. I hope you can do something. 9,000 banks, 6,000 pubs, 4,000 shops in the past 12 years, all gone out of business. It's a big ask. Thank you very much indeed. We'll monitor Keir Starmer today in Great Yarmouth and see what he has to say. Thank you very much indeed for your input.